Welcome to Market Momentum. Man, this past week in the markets, it was a real head-scratcher. We got what should have been great news out of the US, but the way different assets reacted? Puzzling, to say the least. So today, we're going to try and decode what on earth happened and what it might mean. Let's dive in. So here's the big mystery we're digging into today. We got some really positive economic news from the US. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that should have just sent a huge wave of optimism everywhere, right? But that's not what happened. Nope. Instead, what we got was this totally illogical, mixed-up reaction from global markets. It left a lot of folks just scratching their heads, wondering, what is going on? All right, so to kick off this investigation, let's look for our first clue right at the source, the U.S. stock market. I mean, you'd think this would be the one place with a clear positive reaction, but what we actually saw was something else entirely. Okay, so what was this big news? Well, it was that Democrats and Republicans in the U.S. finally looked like they were reaching a deal to avoid a government shutdown. Now, this is huge because it takes a ton of uncertainty off the table, and if there's one thing markets love, it's certainty. This should have been a screaming green light for everybody to start buying. And this is where the puzzle really gets interesting. Check this out. The Dow Jones, the one with all the big traditional industrial companies, it absolutely loved the news. It shot up to a new record high. But then you look at the broader S&P 500 and the tech-heavy Nasdaq, and they basically did nothing. They just stayed flat. So what does that tell us? It kind of suggests investors thought, okay, this stability is great for the old school companies, but maybe it just wasn't enough to get the tech sector excited. They're probably more worried about things like interest rates. What a bizarrely split reaction. Okay, let's move on to the next piece of this puzzle, the crypto space. So if the stock market's reaction was weird and mixed, crypto was, well, it was like it was living in a totally different universe, just playing by its own rules. Yeah, for the most part, crypto just shrugged. It barely even noticed this huge news coming out of the US. You'd think there'd be some kind of positive spillover, but nope. It really looks like crypto is just marching to the beat of its own drum right now, driven by its own internal stuff, technical patterns and market sentiment. The big macro news barely made a dent. What it really comes down to is that the whole crypto space seems to be hitting a ceiling. And it's not just one coin. Look at these key levels here. The total market cap, it's stuck. Bitcoin can't seem to get back on that rising trend. And then you have the big alts like Ethereum and XRP. They're also just pinned down under some major resistance points. It just feels like the internal momentum isn't there right now to break through. All right, and now for maybe the biggest twist in our whole investigation. So we've got a mixed stock market, we've got an indifferent crypto market, and then there's precious metals, which just had this dramatic and honestly totally unexpected rally. This just throws another wrench in the whole thing. So first up, let's talk about gold. It had a really positive reaction. I mean, after a solid week of rallying, it was pushing right up against some pretty big resistance levels. That's a strong move, for sure. It shows there's real interest in buying gold. But, believe it or not, that wasn't even the main event. No, the real showstopper was silver. Out of everything we've looked at today, silver had the most powerful, the most aggressive reaction of them all. It didn't just rally, it surged. It just blew right past what anyone was expecting and became the absolute standout, the clear outlier. And this chart just lays out the puzzle perfectly, doesn't it? You've got stocks doing nothing, gold having a nice little rally, and then silver with this just massive surge. So why? Why the huge difference? Well, one theory is that silver, because it's both a precious metal and an industrial metal, might be attracting more speculative money, people betting on economic stability, maybe even more so than gold. It's a really wild move that feels totally disconnected from the cautious vibe we're seeing everywhere else. So, where does all this leave us? We had a clear, positive event happen in the US, but the market's reaction is just all over the map. So what are you supposed to do when the price action right in front of your face just completely defies what all the analysis says should happen? And that really gets to the heart of it. This is the big takeaway from a week like this one. You can have all the theories, all the models, all the expectations you want. But at the end of the day, the price is the final judge. The market is telling a different story here. And at some point, you just have to listen to the price and accept that, hey, maybe your analysis was wrong. It forces you to rethink everything. So there you have it. That's our breakdown of one very, very puzzling week. I think the key lesson here is pretty simple. Markets aren't always logical. The price itself, that's the ultimate truth.
And learning how to read these confusing signals, that's what can make all the difference. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And hey, if you found this helpful, a subscription and a like would be awesome.